Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. So let's get started, right? So a few years ago, almost a decade, I stumbled across this Hebrew graffiti in downtown Tel Aviv, and it's saying, "And what comes after postmodernism?" It's raising a question if the deconstruction of universal truths and grand narratives can even be followed by anything at all. Little did they know that the postmodern has already sired its heir, the posthuman. And as befitting a post-postmodernist paradigm, one cannot provide a simple short definition of the posthuman. It doesn't have a clear starting point or disciplinary affinity. It's rooted in the works of thinkers like Donna Haraway and Bruno Latour, who refuse to be identified with it, by the way. And it's so full of contradictions that its critique forms an integral part of its discourse. In short, rather than being a new perspective, Professor Andy Mia called posthumanism the detritus of perspectives. Detritus, I'm not sure how to say this word. Yet in the 21st century, almost every discipline was undergoing some form of a posthuman turn. But in order for me to speak with you today of the posthuman turn in language, I must still offer some definition of the beast. So I will refer today roughly to two tropes of the posthuman, which are considered contradictory. On one end, we have the trope often referred to as critical posthumanism, which seeks to invoke a non-anthropocentric perspective or a rereading of human knowledge, doubting the centrality of the human in the natural order, quote unquote. At the heart of it, there is a challenge to the pureness of the category of the human, an argument that we have never been human. And what made this animal human is our coevolution with technology. So our entire culture was always technoculture. Remember the opening scene of Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey? We are these monkeys that became symbiotic with our sticks, and now we think we can conquer space. Some threads of this critical posthumanism are indeed more anti-human, self-hating of our parasite, egotistic, violent nature that ruined the biosphere and should simply stop everything we're doing. Other threads are more affirming, compassionate towards past mistakes, and encouraging us to evolve in order to include other species in our perspective and simply change the story. Change the discourses of our godlike nature, like in religious stories, or deserving of natural rights in modern enlightenment stories. It's time to be more modest and recognize we may not be the hero of this story. Some practice this as purely academic, a thought experiment to challenge scientific knowledge, but others translate this into ethical personal choices such as veganism, climate change activism, or child-free lifestyles. Britta and I participated a few months ago in a conference she and Theresa Hyde organized called Rethinking Language that did just that, encouraged a post-anthropocentric thinking about language. It was Alistair Pennycock that started this in his 2018 book, Posthumanist Applied Linguistics. We used to think of language as a human trait, as embodied and produced by individual bodies, and something unique to us humans that makes us human. Now we acknowledge we have never been just individuals, that our cognition and therefore language may be distributed, that we are languaging involving other people, animals, and things. If we think back on de Saussure's structuralism, we understand now that language is assumed to exist independently from the speaker. And maybe it's time to revisit the relations between the signified and the signified. But this was just one sense of the posthuman. Let us turn to the other trope, often referred to also as transhumanism or posthumanity. This posthuman thought associates humanity with biology and embodiment. So posthumanity would be the attempt to transcend biology. Nature isn't the best we can do, you know. Biology leaves us vulnerable. So through science and technology, we can become more than this, enhance ourselves and live longer. There are a few possible paths to do that. Some would merge biology with technology, while others could simply digitize the whole thing. Catherine Hales has traced this view to the science of cybernetics, which saw humans as patterns of information rather than embodied presence. Today, indeed, physics describes the entire world in terms of information and mathematical equations, and biology treats our genes as information and enables their editing just as we were editing texts. This is a worldview in which mathematics is the actual fabric and language of the universe. And the fact that math, just like language, is merely a system of representation is forgotten. These days, math models can be expressed through various materialities. So both organic and non-organic materials can be printed in 3D printers. In my university, scientists printed a small working heart last year. So math is our new soul, returning to an early idea brought forth by Pythagoras. These information patterns are what's real, while bodies are seen as just one interchangeable material form we might take. So on one hand, this is a very radical thinking. It discards this bioconservative concept of embodied humanity. It demonstrates that humans are indeed not special, being just information like everything else in the universe. But on the other hand, all of this is done from a very humanist mindset, trying to save, preserve, enhance, and further free our individual egos without even requiring any ethical transformation on our part, and most likely leaving many humans and other creatures behind. And the more we externalize our discourses and interactions on digital media, we're in fact becoming posthuman in this sense. So you see, although both senses of the posthuman deem the modern notions of humanity irrelevant, they represent opposing visions. In critical posthumanism, we try to limit ourselves to atone even, trying to reconnect with nature, while in transhumanism, we seek to empower ourselves with more degrees of freedom by overcoming the limitations of nature. I think it's safe to say that although academia embraces the critical posthumanist thought, the public and the tech industry are actually following the transhuman vision. So I want to argue today that the latter trope has a profound impact and implications on the future of language, which are already in motion, and linguistic theory is underprepared for. Now, in order to demonstrate that, I will briefly review the history of language and its media. There has been a long historic process of the externalization of language, followed by an acceleration of language, notable since early 20th century. And I will argue that we are entering a third stage of abolition, erasure, and or complete divorce of language from our perspective. I'll explain. Since the invention of writing, we started a process of externalizing language and storing it outside our bodies. First on rocks, walls, and animal skin, and gradually on less durable materials like scrolls and papers. We associated validity and importance with material durability. Laws that are written in stone versus words are wind. The digitization of language was seen at first as a complete loss of materiality. Characters, sounds, and images turned into ephemeral electric signals. However, in this extreme immaterial state, they often prove to be more durable than written in stone. They are what Dana Boyd calls persistent. Even stones can break and lose information, but bits of information are so easily replicable, spreadable, and searchable that theoretically they can outlive stone. So digitization severs this historic link between materiality and durability, creating this confusing state in which fleeting words we wrote online in a specific context could be taken out of context and come back to haunt us years later. These old modern divisions between orality and literacy that had to do with materiality are no longer relevant. We all experienced this personally online about 25 years ago. Now we hardly think on it anymore. And internet scholars have tried to emphasize the variety of materialities involved in digital media But I think it doesn't change the fact that digital texts are independent of these materialities and they can travel between them intact. This is the only medium that could separate language from its materiality post factum, as Leblebici explained in his seminal book, The Language of New Media. So I must insist on the essential immaterial nature of the digital text as a key feature of cybernetics so we can fully grasp what comes next. When linguistic signs turn into electric signals, they are also subjected to an increased speed, an acceleration of language, if you will. Italian futurists have already anticipated 100 years ago that the speed of technology will accelerate language. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti described the effect as the abolition of syntax and the fragmentation of language into image-like pieces to be reassembled at the subject's will. Futurist art imagined fast-spoken language reduced to onomatopoeias and written system reversed to pictorial logic, which indeed happened online in the early 90s in the form of ASCII art, an additional phenomenon of typographic creativity. But Marinetti's description of these image-like pieces resonate emoji more than anything. Linguists have often countered the moral panic about emoji replacing language with the answer that emoji have no grammar, and so they cannot function as language. But perhaps the language of this fast digital future is one that lacks grammar, as futurists predicted. Linguist Guy Deutscher argued that language change is a result of a historic battle between two evolutionary motivations, economy and expressiveness. These are polar motivations, since they either make the words shorter or longer. But when we move from orality and literacy to iconicity, an emoji is a picture that weighs just like a character in bits of information, so we captured both motivations when replacing many words with one image. It's both faster and shorter, and more expressive and meaningful. Collapsing these past dichotomies is the result of acceleration, and this disrupts language by increasing its ambiguity. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but which words exactly? The interpretation of emoji is a moving target. Furthermore, the relationship between emoji and the body are twofold. Some linguists argue that emoji are akin to body gestures. And we see how important it is to people that these signs will not just represent objects in the world, but also the speakers themselves. People would give up the function of economy and take the extra time and effort to make sure their emoji reflect their skin tone or specific ideologies. On the other end, we use emoji in ways that don't map onto actual emotions and facial expressions. Nobody really laughs with tears of joy so much. We send strings of smileys, winks, and hearts, while our real faces are blank. We simply produce these fast, huge waves of affect that have everything and nothing to do with actual bodies. The more they signify real life, the more their usage is removed from its actuality. But the third stage we are in now is even worse. Accelerated language risks abolishing more than just the syntax. It could result in a complete erasure of language itself. Ever since the biblical story of Babel, humanity dreamt of the utopia of speaking in one universal language. Now it seems we found this language, a new lingua franca, and it isn't English nor Esperanto. It's code, computer code. We are now building spaces that speak only code. Smart homes, smart cities, smart mobility. And they are aiming to change our geographical spaces in a way that will no longer be linguistic landscapes, not one that caters to humans. If you check out the plans of smart cities that are envisioned by technology companies that build them, you will see they plan to have no traffic lights or sidewalks. These are semiotic systems for humans that will become redundant when only autonomous cars and delivery bots will be on the move. If you want to walk among them, they cannot and will not see you. Not in the human sense of seeing as an image representing a body that moves in space. The smart infrastructure speaks only data. No characters, just signals, coordinated via computers and clouds. And so humans need to become nodes on this network maps in order to coordinate their movements, and gain their access. Humans, too, will need to be managed by a mobility app like Move It or Waze and regulated like traffic. In a sense, we already are. Other vehicles will recognize humans only as data points on virtual maps, not as bodies in space. And the space will no longer speak to us. It no longer needs to address us nor be built around us. Cities will be no different from internet protocols or blockchain smart contracts that no longer appeal to our reasons and choices. They no longer require our clumsy, untrustworthy efforts of coordination, leaving our communication out of the equation in order to serve us better, allegedly. We no longer need the language to communicate in this Internet of Things world in which everything is smart, except for us. We'll be the only ones who don't speak the new language so well, lost in translation to data. But don't worry, because in this smart and fast utopia that the tech entrepreneurs are envisioning for us, we could still keep up and synchronize with the fast pace of things around us by discarding this slow process of languaging altogether. Elon Musk, who develops brain-computer interfaces, told the press that in 5 years, well, it was in 2020, so there's barely 3 years left, we will no longer need to use language at all. And between you and me, I fear that after his Twitter scandals, he'll want to abolish human language even faster. The promise is to tap directly into our intentions and communicate them telepathically. Something that will be possible now that everything speaks the language of computer code. This too is an ancient fantasy driving the history of the idea of communication, as described by media philosopher John Durham Peters. Our struggle with communication and interpretation was seen as an index of man's fallenness. And so our way back to the Garden of Eden is to achieve St. Augustine's ideal of soul-to-soul communication that transcends both body and language. In this ancient fantasy, both body and language are poor mediators that we need to do away with. So now we can understand the process of the externalization of language from another perspective. Maybe media was never about merely representing humans through linguistic means. It was an attempt to capture and preserve and transport us. As philosopher Friedrich Kittler notes, media determine our situation. Humans are merely what the media of the times could capture and preserve of them. Art historian Genia Gershman talks about the earliest portraits painted on mummies in Fayum in Egypt as attempts to capture one's soul. And you can think through the entire history of media technologies as these attempts to capture, store, and manipulate bits of the human essence, reviving one's voice at will after the body has perished through a recording, or appearing to others apart from flesh through film, etc., etc. Media were always human traps. But now, digital information replaces both language and the self, whether we consider this the goal of digitizing ourselves or merely the existing concept of the self as data. The boundaries between the medium and the message are collapsed, and the process is bidirectional, because in addition to externalizing ourselves onto digital media, we also venture inwards with brain-computer and VR interfaces. The assumption behind brain-computer interfaces is that beyond the expressed language hides a more authentic language of true intentions that until now was just poorly mediated, but this operating system can be accessed directly. And it is assumed it speaks numbers rather than words. Marshall McLuhan truly understood the deep meaning of cybernetics. He envisioned that slang and cliches are the only thing that prevent language from turning into algebra. So I guess we're finally doing away with this linguistic shell to reveal its mathematical nature, which is, if you recall, the essence of all things, according to some. This means that through computer code, we can access the brain's operating system directly and reprogram the human. For example, Professor Amit Pinchevsky of Hebrew University has written about post-traumatic treatments through exposure in VR. We no longer require soldiers to process their experience through language. We no longer treat them as agents, subjects, and value their self-reflection. We simply aim to deprogram trauma, to fix the bug in the limbic system directly. Pinchevsky termed it beautifully as the replacement of Hermes and his hermeneutics with iris, which represents instant communication through presence. So perhaps this is how a post-humanist linguistic turn might look like. The erasure of hermeneutics means the complete decentering of the human speaker as discoverer and interpreter of his or her own experience, the abolition of the psychoanalytical subject for the sake of the perceived superiority and authenticity found in the immediacy of code. Now, this is not some bleak futurism that I'm foretelling here. This is already being built and advocated for, and some of it is already happening in the fringes. It's just not mainstream enough yet. It may be a wrong, reductionist, poor view of what language is, but too many important people believe that underneath this mess, language could be modeled and is computable. It may be chaotic, but chaos theory is also math. Now, I could stop here and it would be more than enough for us to discuss, but I want to make an even more radical posthuman provocation, which is more in line with the first meaning of posthumanism, as a decentering of the human from the order of things. Given the traditional assumptions on language as what makes us human and its origin in our biological bodies, I found the complete opposite of that perception in Susan Blackmore's view on what language is, and therefore what humans are. Let's hear it in her voice.
Language is a parasite.
Sorry. Just a sec.
That we've adapted to, not something that was there originally for our genes.
Okay, so language is this parasite that we have adapted to. The selfish gene theory that Richard Dawkins popularized has its roots in cybernetics as well. And it argues that the only replicators are genes. And genes are the agents in our world, while humans should be seen as the carriers of genes, gene machines. They are merely possessing an illusion of individual agency. But what creates that illusion within us? So Dawkins assumed that culture operates through the same mechanism. He deduced there must be a second replicator at play. He called it a meme. And Susan Blackmore developed memetics into a fully blown cultural theory in which the memes compete with the genes in this grand battle of natural selection. We humans are the battleground. Memes, which are stuff like ideas, sounds, and gestures that we copy, populate our brains and push them to grow and get better at the copying process. In this story, the replicators, these evolutionary engines, are the agents. We are simply their media. What we perceive as our identity, self, or soul are foreign agents who use us to breathe. In fact, there is no us, you see. History was never about us. It wasn't even our story. From this radical perspective, Blackmore revisits the entire meaning of the history of media technologies. Memes have hit a wall in their ability to enlarge our brains without killing us. So they pushed us to invent more and more means of external storage and replication, hence our media. And here we thought we wanted to communicate with each other. So media weren't even about capturing us, as I argued before. They were replacing us as hosts for the memes. Now, when I started this talk, I presented critical posthumanism and posthumanity or transhumanism as opposing visions. However, when it comes to language, this radical decentering of the human, thinking of language as an independent agent, is actually quite compatible with the view that everything is information as well. Our brain and bodies are indeed media now. It isn't just a metaphor anymore. But while Blackmore describes evolution as a grand battle between the selfish interests of genes and memes, digital information collapses the boundary between biology and ideas, between genes and memes, since both could be digitized, translated to this new source code, the alleged universal language of creation, information. Postmodernism has separated language from the body and established its primacy over biology. But while critical posthumanism has tried to reclaim embodiment and neo-materialities, the digital version of posthuman has done the opposite and set language completely free, divorced from the body. So let's consider the outcome of this process for language and for us humans. In 2017, Facebook allegedly pulled the plug on an AI project out of fear that algorithms have created their own language that humans cannot understand. The press, of course, presented things more dramatically than they actually were. The bots didn't actually invent a whole new language. They simply stopped using grammar. They did not need it since it was only slowing them down. There was no human interlocutor, and it was more efficient for the two machines to exchange data faster with fewer words. They created a code based on the minimal characters and numbers needed to activate each other. Humans still wanted to keep an eye on the process, so it is a bit scary when you are left out. I think this is the stage we're at right now, barely keeping up with the speed of AI, insisting that things will still be translated to us and make sense to us too. But we can't have it both ways. The price of this smart, fast utopia is giving up our control and ultimately our agency, because we are too slow as language agents. Whether we will it or not, Hermes is dying and the age of Iris is upon us. And we now have AI that is getting better at each passing day, algorithms trained on tremendous amounts of text and live discourses, which are able to produce not only great images, but also discourses in any style you wish, based on the linguistic style of your favorite authors or your dead loved ones. The applications are endless. There are also algorithms such as word2vec that are able to learn context through mathematical mapping of the relationship between words in many texts. And so overall, we seem to have trained our replacements, new agents that are able to produce language and replicate memes better than humans with much less mutations. We're still needed for now as training data, I guess. We remain present in language, disembodied, as stories and discourses that algorithms and animation technologies can assemble at will. Just juxtaposing a few advanced digital technologies of language and imaging, we now have media that are able to capture us and continue our narratives without us. And they might as well be us. I'm not sure anymore we can argue these are just simulations, representations of us. Not when numbers claim ontological status and are no longer seen as a system of representation. Ironically, however, when language no longer depends on brains and bodies and characters become signals, language in fact regains its magical metaphysical properties, which were part of its history in the first place. Information science now gives a new meaning to the old biblical and mystical ideas of creation with words and numbers, as if characters are indeed spaces that can hold spirit, words made flesh, as St. Augustine or Pythagoras saw it. Language is once more not a mere cultural phenomena, not an arbitrary representation of things in the world. Only when truly divorced from the signifiers once again can hold its anima, its power, and truly represented by way of animation. So you see, the digital era is actually the apocalypse of science. Since molecular biology is just another text, and matter is also language now. Sorry, can you silence them? So in the story I told you today, language played two different roles. A limited old medium we found a way to bypass, a disguise of our true intentions that needs to be torn in order to reveal the code of our real selves, or a selfish agent that is just about to discard us as its old media replacing us with superior artificial language agents. Now, both narratives share one clear lesson. Digitization is a game changer for language. Language isn't just distributed between us and more things now. It's slipping away from us. It melts into numbers. It threatens to gain complete independence from human experience. And sooner rather than later, the question will be forced upon us, who are we without language as we know it? In biblical Hebrew, speaking and a thing are practically the same word, separated only by one character, the one associated with the name of God, the divine will of God. It is as if we were things before language took over us, animated us with its divine breath, and now we become things again. Data points. Just one more thing connected to the Internet of Things. And if it is up to tech utopians, we shall return the divine spark we received through breath and expressed through speech in the form of an information upload. That's it. Thank you.